Okay, and on to our fourth little lesson on proportion. And again, Math 026, 038, and 052 very specifically taught in your courses. Math 053, the skills in this chapter are definitely um, uh, one of the things that does continue to come up. So, sometimes you learn something in math and it's sort of a little side thing, and you learn it in one course and it never really appears again. Definitely the proportion stuff and the percentages, which we're going to start to talk about now, is just something that is becomes part and parcel of pretty well every math course you take. Almost every chapter in some way or other, these types of ideas can present themselves, especially the percentages. So what we're going to look at in this quick little lesson is the basic three types of percent questions that can come up. And then in the next lessons, we're going to then apply those to kind of word problem sort of situations and that kind of stuff. So you will remember maybe that earlier in our review lessons, we were reminded that percentages are actually just another way of writing fractions with a denominator of 100 per cent. Cent is 100, so per 100. So therefore, since percents are fractions, that means percents are also ratios, because we know that fractions and ratios are really just the same thing. So there's three percentages. Why don't you write those as fractions and as ratios? Okay, probably should have gave slightly better instructions there, I'm realizing, because I didn't specify whether they should be reduced fractions and ratios or not. I think we probably will reduce them. We generally do. So 89% is 89 out of 100 as a fraction. And as a ratio, that means 89 to 100, like so. 15% is 15 over 100, and I think I'm going to reduce that, yeah. So I noticed that both top and bottom can divide by 5, so that is actually 3/20ths as a fraction. And so we could write that as a ratio either as 15 to 100 or 3 to 20. Either would be fine, and for the sake of our questions that we're going to do, doing this extra work of reducing the ratio to 3 to 20 is actually just going to waste extra time and introduce the possibility that you accidentally make a mistake. So we're actually going to tend to just use these ratios as 15 to 100 when we see 15%. 320% is 320 over 100. As a fraction, we would normally reduce that, divide top and bottom by 20, and you would get 16 over 5. Or you might have noticed top and bottom divide by 10 first and then divide them by 2 after that. Even if you go in stages, you will eventually get to 16 over 5. So 320% as a ratio is 320 to 100, or 16 to 5. Those are both valid ways to write that ratio. And again, we're generally just going to stick with this one, because why take the extra time to reduce it to 16 over 5 if you don't need to? And what we want to notice about all these percents once they are ratios is that we want to think of them as a part to a whole. So the green and the purple there, 89% means the whole, if the whole was 100, 89 out of 100, right, is what 89% means. 89 out of every 100. So the green, the percentage, is the part out of the whole 100. So if we take that idea of that a percent is a ratio of a part to the whole, right? We got that again right there, a ratio of a part to the whole. We can solve all kinds of questions that come up out of percent scenarios. And again, as I mentioned at the start, there are three specific ones that arise, and it all depends on what information you're given and what information you want to find. So here is the first one, and there's two examples of the first one. We want to find 38% of 550. Now, many of you might be fairly familiar already with percentages, and when you multiply and when you divide and that, those basic little shortcuts. Nice thing about thinking about them in terms of ratios and proportions like we're going to do right now is that if you ever forget that, you can remind yourself by doing this about what those shortcuts are. So we are going to set up a proportion equation where we have a part to the whole equal to a part to the whole. And one of those parts and wholes is always going to be our percent out of 100. So the first one, 38%, 38 in green, percent in purple, the part and the whole are 38 to 100. Now, what else do we have here? What is 38%? You have to read these words so carefully. 38% of 550. Okay, that tells me that 550 is the whole. Whoops, and I am looking for the part, like so. So the wording can just ever so subtly change, and that switches around. So you want to read that carefully and say, is 550 the part, or is 550 the whole? What is 38% of? So out of 550, out of the whole 550. Now that we've set that ratio up, we can just go back to what we did in our last lesson, where we turn it into fractions, and we use our shortcut method to solve. Grab the cross product and divide by the other number. 38 times 550 divided by 100, and you get 209. So 209 out of 550 is the same as 38%, is the same as 38 out of 100. What is, I think I'm going to get you to try. Yeah, so try this one the same way. And again, you may know shorter ways to do this, especially this first one. It's kind of the easiest to do without doing this whole ratio setup. But we want to introduce the ratio setup to help us handle when we get into more complicated situations. Okay, so let's take a look. It's identical to the last one, just different numbers. So with all of these, remember, we want to start by thinking part to whole equals part to whole. And one of the parts to wholes is the 65%, so 65 to 100. What is 65% of 240? So 240 is the whole, and we are looking for the part out of 240. Once you've set that ratio up, turn it into a fraction. Find the cross product that doesn't have any variables, 65 and 240, and divide by the other number. And we get, in this case, 156. So 156 out of 240 is 65%. If you wrote a test with 240 questions and you got 156 of them right, you got 65%. 65 out of every 100 correct. All right, scenario number 2. We're going to turn things around. Read carefully. 18 is 45% of what number? Now, some people read this and it doesn't sound any different to them. So what I want you to notice, look back at the last one, of 550, 38% of 550. 550 was the whole. 18 is 45% of what number? What number is the whole we are looking for? We don't know the whole. We know that 18 is the part, but of what number? So we set it up the same way. Part to whole equals part to whole. And one of those is always the percent. That's really easy to do. 45 to 100. 45%. And now they have told us that the of what number, so the unknown is the whole. 18 is the part. 18 out of what is the same as 45%. And again, that's the hard part. Once you set this up, I'm going to speed through these now. Once you have set up the ratios, turn them into fractions, identify the cross product without any variables in it, multiply those and divide by the other one, like so, and you get an answer. So 18 out of 40 is 45%. So again, the second one is the exact same idea. You give it a try. I'll give you a minute. Okay, so part to whole and part to whole. We have 7. As soon as you see the 74%, you can write one half of the equation, 74 to 100. And now you just have to determine what is the part and what is the whole. 88.8 is 74% of what number. So the what number, the thing we're looking for is the whole. 88.8 is the part. Like so. Once you've identified that, you can write it as a ratio. 74 out of 100 is equal to 88.8 out of what? Find the cross product with no variables, divide by the other one, and we get 120. So 88.8 out of 120 is 74%. And our final type, and again, we're just looking at these just straight without any context, but next time we'll do word problems that result in these same three scenarios. So our last one is, notice this time we have not been given the percent. So in the first two, we were given the percent, and then either the part or the whole. This time we have not been given the percent. So in other words, what percent n to 100? So we still are talking about percent. So one of the wholes is still 100, but we don't know what the percent is. So n is to 100 as 160 out of 800. 160 is the part, 800 is the whole, like so. So in our first variation, we didn't know the part. In our second variation, we didn't know the whole. And in our third variation, we don't know the percent. Turn them into fractions. Identify the cross product without variables. Divide by the other one. So 100 times 160 divided by 800. And you get your answer, 20. And of course, in this case, that 20 is actually a percent. So make sure you give your answer as a percentage in this case, because they've asked for what percent. And as we did in the other two, you've seen one example of this type. Try one yourself. All right, so here we go. 92 out of 130 is what percentage? Notice I always like to start with my percent on the left-hand side there. So what out of 100? What percentage goes on one side? And then 92 is the part, and 130 is the whole. Careful, because so far I've always had the part being smaller than the whole, but we know we can have percentages over 100. So you could have a situation where the part is actually bigger than the whole, right? Where you have 150% or something. So 92 out of 130, part is part to whole, n to 100, part to whole, 92 to 130, part to whole. Write it as a fraction. Find the cross product, divide by the other one, and we get 70.76923, and they said to one decimal place, so that is 70.8%. Okay, so what I would like you to do now is I've mixed all three of them up there, and I want you to try to figure out which one is which by setting up those ratios. So remember the percentage on one side, something to 100, and then on the other side, figure out what is the part and what is the whole, and then solve using our cross product method. Okay, so let's try and figure out which of these is which. So for each of them, I'm going to try and spot the percentage first. On this question here, that's easy. It's 32%, so I'm going to start with 32 to 100. And now on the right, I just have to identify the part and the whole. 60 is 32% of what number? The what number is the whole, and the 60 is the part. 60 out of what is 32%? And then let's set up the second one here. Again, identify the percent first. In this case, the percent is unknown. What percent? So that's n out of 100. Now, you see, I warned you to be careful on this one. What percent of 250, that's the whole, is 875? What percent out of 250? So 250 is actually the whole, and the part in this question is actually bigger than the whole. So again, we have a percentage that's actually going to be bigger than 100%. And in the third one, identify the percentage first. Again, this one's easy, 4.5%. That's 4.5 out of 100. what is 4.5% of 382? The 382 is the whole, the unknown is the part, like so. So there's our three setups. And oh yeah, I actually said to just set them up, solve if you have time. Okay, well, let's carry on and actually solve these now. Turn them all into fractions. Identify the cross product without a variable and the other number, so multiply the cross product and divide by 32. Find the cross product without a variable, multiply them and divide by the other number. Cross product without any variables is that one there, divide by the other number. So there's your three calculations, and there is the answers you should have got. Okay, so percentage on the left, something out of 100, and then the part and the whole on the right. And if you can set that up, then away you go, turn them into fractions and solve with the cross product.